Hello, everyone. I would like to welcome you to today's webinar, Leverage Big Data to Manage Your Avaya UC Environment. IUG is pleased to add this informative and educational webcast to our 2018 program. Before we begin, I would like to share a few tips for using the GoToWebinar during today's presentation. First, you can minimize your navigation bar by clicking the top arrow button. I encourage you to submit questions throughout the event via the question and answer box on your webinar toolbar. Our speakers will answer questions at the end of the presentation. Lastly, a recording of this presentation will be available for download on the IUG website by the end of the day. And with that, I'd like to hand it over to our speaker from Virsae, Ross Williams.
Thanks very much, Molly. And thank you all for your time today. We're not going to take too much of that time. I know everyone's got their day job, and we'll quickly work through this presentation. And if you do have any questions, we'll go through that at the end. So today's subject is leveraging big data in your Avaya UC environment. I guess the basic premise that we always go back to at Virsae is that you can't manage what you can't measure. So the old management adage. And with big data and big data analytics, you certainly get plenty to measure and plenty to manage. So big data is one of those industry terms that's come along reasonably recently. And I guess a lot of you on the call will be thinking, you know, what is that and how does it really apply to my day job in managing an Avaya UC environment? And big data means different things to different people. But I guess at this highest level, it's tracking every interaction that your customers, both internal and external, have with your organization, keeping all that information so you understand exactly how those interactions have gone, and you know a lot more about the customer. It's coming into prominence in IT operations as a tool that helps us all to be more efficient in our day jobs. So how do we use it in UC? Of course, the big one, improving customer experience. Customer experience is the #1 differentiator that our businesses have over our competition. It's increasingly important to businesses building that brand and providing our customers with a really good interaction, being really simple to work with. Of course, we can use it to increase the uptime of our platforms, and strive towards that 100% availability. Reduce mean time to repair, increase our operational efficiency, so enable us to do more. It gives tools to make us more efficient, enable us to do more in our day jobs. And of course, increasingly detect fraudulent behavior or security problems. To take advantage of big data, it's a very difficult concept to take existing tools. It makes it requires quite a change in our approach to access and manage all of that the data that's at our fingertips. And in the Avaya world, there really is a huge amount of data, certainly when it comes to service management, available in the Avaya platforms. Certainly an industry leader in what's exposed and what's available to us there to improve our efficiency and start delivering on the promise of big data. So all of these interfaces, all of these APIs are coming up on the screen now, all available in the Avaya world, and you'll all start to recognize these things. And I guess, like myself, until recently, quite frustrated in the amount of information that's there, but the inability to take that, store that, analyze it, and use it has always been quite difficult up until relatively recently. So I just wanted to work through 3 examples that I hope you all can relate to in your jobs. It's very simplistic examples of the type of data that we can handle and we have access to, and the way that it can be used in a practical sense. So the first example I wanted to touch on was mysterious media gateway outage. That's a situation where you get a media gateway or sometimes multiple media gateways that drop. Causes business disruption. The voice team take a look at it, and decide that it must be a network thing because, the media gateways have now recovered and everything's up and running. No one made any changes. There's no other explanation. Network guys say there weren't any events that they were able to detect. It must be a problem at the voice end, and you kind of reach an impasse. Well, today, and it has been for some time, that information related specifically to those outages is there. It's a matter of having access to it and being able to see and use that. So what I've taken here is a real case. I've pulled this information out of a Syslog file, and this is what it looks like in its raw format. Obviously not highlighted like that in red, but the thing is there that the information is available to us. So what I've highlighted there is multiple media gateways, all complaining more or less about the same thing. So what happens from a practical point of view, if a media gateway goes down, the Avaya server instigates a trace route. So a trace route is basically a message that goes across the network to find out where the break in the network has occurred. Essentially, the server's saying, I can no longer talk to the media gateway. Perhaps there's a problem with the network. I'm going to run a trace route and see if there is. So within Syslog, that trace route is captured, and you can see there that multiple media gateways are only complaining about the connectivity after hop 2. So hop 1 is fine. They're able to see local router. Hop 2 can't get past there. So very clear that is absolutely a network problem, and we can go back to the network guys with that information and show them where it happened. The network team will, of course, understand what a trace route is. It's part of their daily tool set that they will use. Second example I wanted to touch on was the SIP trunk outage. So same sort of thing. We're looking at this as in these three examples as a root cause analysis. So we're looking at this post problem. So same thing, the SIP trunk group's gone down. That's reported through. The carrier, in this case, is saying everything looks okay to them. And again, the investigation reaches an impasse. So no one's able to completely determine where the problem has occurred. In this case, we're taking advantage of SM console. So again, this is real raw data taken from a real customer with a real outage. And I've removed some of the information there that may be private. And you can see there again, in amongst all of that text, which of course is very difficult for a human to interpret, but in amongst that text there, we can see that that SIP trunk went down at 1804, went down for 2 minutes, recovered automatically at 1806. And the problem at the time was a SIP error message of 500 server internal error. So you see once again that information is there, very difficult for a human to consume. And of course you have to be mining this information and retaining your syslogs, retaining your console output to have the ability to go back and look at this. And the third one, contact center managers had a complaint from a customer that there was a pretty rude exchange with an agent, and the agents ended the call. We go to the contact center manager's gone to the agents. Of course, no one's going to add up to that. We're going to own up to that. Again, the investigation's at an impasse. We've only got the customer saying what happened versus what the agent said what happened. Again, within the logs, in this case, the external call history interface that's available in CMS there. Again, another real world example that we're picking up. Or I've blanked out some of the information, but in the ECH log there, we can see, and again, this is a real example, we can see the information, we can see the agent ID. In the larger red box there was the calling line ID, so the number of the customer. So we line that up with the date and time, and we can see towards the middle of the screen there, there's a 1. And amongst all of that other text, and that 1 indicates who terminated the call. And in this case, it was the agent. So starting to support the customer's complaint there. So 3 really simple examples. that hopefully you can relate to, and you can see how capturing those logs is one thing, but interpreting them, understanding what all the fields are and pulling that out and making that that information useful is another. So key to big data, automatically mining that data from multiple sources. So what you want to do is get hold of, all of those interfaces that we saw earlier, automatically mine data from those and store that. And I've mentioned relevant containers there because there's an awful lot of information. So taking up a framework like we have at Virsae with the Outage service management framework allows you to store that data in relevant containers because there's an awful lot of it. You can't just dump that on the floor and come back to it. It's got to be relatively well organized. And of course, to do that, this requires mountains of storage. So there's a huge amount of data pouring out of these Avaya systems. Storage is going to be a problem. You literally need hundreds of terabytes, and depending on how long you want to retain the information and trend it, and I'd suggest a year or more is a good number. That's going to take an awful lot of storage. The application of machine learning, that's a really important one. So the examples I've given are relatively simplistic and they're backwards looking. But if we just imagine for a moment the media gateway outage and being able to prevent that from happening in the first place, which is our ultimate goal. So we had those multiple media gateways going down. The reality is, and amongst all of this data, there are precursors to that type of outage. Very, very often there's the health of those WAN circuits degrade over time. Excuse me. So to give you some examples, we capture things like at the H248 level, capture those interactions. So you can see H248 messages starting to time out is a typical indicator. If the H248 timeouts get bad enough, that's escalated to H248 channel restarts. Again, that's not service impacting at this point, so there's plenty of forewarning, plenty of indication that there's going to be a problem happening, and we may even see a link bounce. So there's lots of precursors to that actual outage of the media gateways deregistering and causing business impact. And ideally, we can use machine learning to pick up and interpret those types of events and then take some steps to prevent them happening in the first place. There can even be more layers above that. So for example, we only start to see the H248 timeouts as the bandwidth running across the WAN, those particular WAN segments, as the bandwidth gets up close to what's set as the maximum in the interbandwidth settings inside Communication Manager or inside Session Manager. Or if those are not set, it might be that we get a certain amount of calls using a certain amount of codec on those WAN segments where we're starting to push the bandwidth. So you can see there we can get layers and layers and layers with that machine learning. Excuse me. And of course, in reaction to that, the ability to automate a response. So having humans sitting there looking at dashboards, that's one thing. But of course, once we've been able to detect these things automatically, if we know what the problem is, we know how to address those particular issues. And it might be to log into, if there's a known problem, for example, log into a particular router and take some sort of action. That automation, if that can be scripted, that can prevent that outage from happening in the first place. So the ability to not only learn and detect what's going on, but to provide automation so that those outages can be prevented 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. And of course, taking all that big data and visualizing it for humans, charts, graphs, dashboards is really important. So the realities of dealing with big data requires a big engine. The Virsae service management platform is built in the cloud. It's built from the cloud from day one. So what we get is access to huge amounts of data across a very, very large base that allows us to build that artificial intelligence. We see an awful lot of interactions, in fact, billions of them per month in that environment. The reality is, say there at the bottom, that legacy software has very has a lot of difficulty in handling this sort of big data. And what we do in Azure is at times we've got the capability to scale the amount of server and processing power we have. And at times we will seize literally thousands of servers to process data in that cloud. So Virsae is built for the cloud from day one. So very different from an enterprise application that is simply hosted in the cloud. Having one application, a single application that serves the entire world, gives us access to that huge variance in implementations. So it gives us a wide range of data. All of the data is mined automatically and sorted into those containers under that ITIL service management framework. We're applying our big data analytics there and our machine learning to that. And a real huge advantage there is that if you're data scientists, the guys that are creating the ability, doing the AI, if they can understand UC or have access to people that understand UC deeply, they understand what they need to search for. So having an understanding of how these environments fit together is really crucial. And of course, making use of all of this big data across multiple data centers, database sharding, which is a technology we've created ourselves, is really important, along with our workflow engine to provide that level of automation. Now this diagram here relates to a typical Avaya environment. It looks pretty busy. The key point is all of the Avaya red endpoints in particular. We're compatible with all of those, and we're pulling a huge amount of information out of all of those platforms across the enterprise network. And the important bit there is up on the top left, where we process all this information securely inside Microsoft Azure. We have APIs up in the cloud there to share that information. So there's standard APIs, the standard out-of-the-box interfaces to things like ServiceNow, which of course is a cloud-to-cloud communication. There's email, SMS gateways to take all that big data, take the output, and to notify humans via email, via SMS, and other systems via that API. Our dashboards look like this, although they're currently going through a cosmetic revamp and being changed a little. But there's a series of real-time dashboards that let you know what's going on in these environments in real time. So as that big data is streaming through, that's presented onto screens for human consumption, as you can see there. So everything that can be measured in an Avaya environment is measured and presented there in real time. And also historically. So this is an example of a capacity management report. This is what the UI looks like. And you can see there on the right, the number of historic reports being presented. Being a cloud-based application, again, there is no concept of release when it comes to cloud. We run a 2-week agile development sprint methodology. So what you use on the cloud, that one application that serves the entire world, is always current. So every 2 weeks it's refreshed, there's new functionality, there's bug fixes. And the only thing you see change down the middle there, the writing's very small, but that refers to sprint 83. So every 2 weeks this application moves forward, and you've got to be able to move that quickly to match the speed that manufacturers are now moving at. Avaya's producing a ton of new capability all of the time, and keeping up with that is quite difficult. This screen just shows the automation, so the ability for customers to come in and set things up themselves, and then to automate responses is there through a graphical UI. We can help with that, or business partners can help with that. Or if you've got the internal capability, you can do it yourselves. And finally, this is the ITIL service management wheel that we build our application to, where we break all that big data up into the relevant containers for reporting and consumption. So that rounds out the presentation there. The contact details if you want to learn more. are on the screen. Feel free to reach out and contact anyone from Virsae should you like to know more information. Quite happy to take any questions if anyone has typed anything through. All right, there's a question here saying, what if you don't have the ECH? Is that a separate license? That's an interesting question. On some of CMS platforms, ECH is there and is available for use. And in some platforms, it requires some action by Avaya. I know with release 18 of CMS, it is becoming a standard offer that, as I understand it, it is purchasable. Some of the older platforms, as I mentioned already, some of the older platforms, that ECH feed is just there and on your machine, and you can use it. Any more questions coming through there? It's just the one. So you guys either got that and I did a really good job, or you're no, nothing more.
Awesome. Well, thank you, Ross, for your time today. And we would like to also thank Virsae for taking the time to give us this informative webinar. So as a reminder, a copy of today's presentation will be available for download on the IUG website by this evening. And as you exit the webcast, please complete the evaluation for today's event. Your feedback and input are important and appreciated as we further develop the webcast program. Thank you again for attending, and enjoy the rest of your day.